Hello everyone, welcome to the Unity Prototyping a Card Game workshop. I am your instructor, Doug Kim. I'm currently a software developer for a company called HostedBiz. I just graduated from a game development degree at Algonquin College. I first started using Unity by learning from YouTube tutorials from this guy called Braggies when I was about 13, but I finally got proper education in game development when I reached college. You can see a few games I created on my portfolio at dogkim.me, and you can network with me on LinkedIn. So this workshop is all about helping you along your path in game development, whether you're just exploring it, hoping to get a job in it, or you're just curious. A few steps to do is to build up your portfolio as you're moving along in your career. You can do this by working on personal projects and attending game jams. You should also build up your network by attending game conferences. Some popular ones is GDC, Nordic Game Conference. Believe it or not, but the game world is actually very small. Even as a beginner, you can meet creators of large games, such as Valhalla or even Halo, as I have myself. You can build up your skills by self-learning, whether that's through YouTube, documentation, books, attending workshops, or pursuing a degree. You should specialize in the area you like most in game development, whether that's gameplay, AI, or even just art by making environments, character assets, or game assets. What is Unity? Unity is originally a lightweight component game engine. Scripting in Unity utilizes the C# programming language, and Unity can be used for more than just creating games. Unity's rendering software is also used in the film industry. You can think about movies or even shows you've seen on Disney+, Netflix, or Amazon Prime. Unity is also used for machine learning. You can read into machine learning agents. It's some pretty powerful stuff. Games made with Unity. Some popular games made with Unity is Cuphead, Hollow Knight, Escape from Tarkov, Subnautica. There's a really diverse range of games here. You can see 2D games and you can also see 3D games. It's all really based on how far in depth you want to go with the lighting, the rendering engine, and it's extremely customizable. It's only limited by your imagination. So I keep saying component-based. What does that mean? Components are meant to be reusable, and they often have a single purpose. Components work together to solve a problem. Example, a cup is meant to hold liquids. A lid is meant to contain. A cup with a lid will contain your coffee. If you want to read more into this, I recommend reading into Solid Design Principles. It's a great way to look at object-oriented programming. So this workshop in particular, we will be using Unity to create a card game. So what's in a card game? At its core, it's really just driving and reaching a finish line. There's some extra things you can find in card games, such as drifting, power-ups, multiplayer, and changing vehicles. Often we hear in programming is something called creating a skeleton. Essentially, the core skeleton of a card game is driving and having a destination. So that's what we will be doing today. And if we have some time, we'll work on some of these add-ons. So to begin the workshop, let's open up Unity. Or I guess now we start with Unity Hub. I'm just going to exit this, open up Unity Hub, and hopefully we all have it installed. I recommend always installing the long-term support version unless there's like a experimental feature you'd like to try out. So long-term support versions of Unity is supported for about 2 years. Typically, this is the time frame for a small to medium-sized game studio to have their game completed. However, it is also possible to migrate to a newer version if there is a need for newer features. And to make our project here, you just go to Projects, New Project, select the version of Unity you'd like to utilize. I'm just using this version, but having the latest version of Unity long-term support is recommended. I'm just going to call this card game. You can call it whatever you like. And we click Create Project. Believe it or not, Unity is actually the lighter engine compared to Unreal Engine. So I will give you all a moment to have your Unity engine create its project while I just explain the layout here. So first, right here in the center, we have something called the scene, or also referred to as the viewport. The viewport has several different types of things you can see, but the regular settings should be just fine. There's also the game view, where you can see the perspective of the player when you start the game. On the left side here, we have the hierarchy. The hierarchy lists every single object within the game space. And right now, we only start off with a main camera and a directional light, which I believe is supposed to be the sun here. On the bottom, we have our project view. You can see a file explorer of your game files, and you can also see a console here. And this will be the output of whatever you like to print or log in your program. But you would also see errors pop up if you might have messed something up. On the right side here is your inspector. So if I select an object such as the main camera, I'm able to see the properties of the camera. It appears to have 3 components: transform, camera, and audio listener. And we will get more into transform a little bit later. On the top left, we have different controls and tools for you to use. The primary 3 tools you'll be using is the move tool, the rotate tool, and the scale tool. The move tool allows you to move objects, the rotate tool allows you to rotate objects, and the scale tool allows you to scale objects. And we'll be returning to the PowerPoint here. So making an object move. All objects in Unity have a transform component. Transform component contains both position and rotation. We can translate the position and change the rotation. And let's look into how we will be doing that now. So I'm going to start off by right-clicking the hierarchy and going down to 3D objects and plane. So I just want to create something that kind of represents our road. I can also rename it to road here just to have it a little bit more organized. If you have deselected the object, you can select an object and press F2 to rename it. I'm going to select my plane with my scale tool. So I can select the scale tool by clicking from the top left, or I can press the R key. So W, E, and R switches between the 3 primary tools we have. So I'm just going to make it nice and long, not too creative, but if you'd like to make a cool track afterwards, that's well within your rights. Our road, however, is really bright and it's going to be kind of hard to see. So down here in our project, let's right-click the assets folder and create another folder. Let's call it material. And let's go inside the material folder. Within the material folder, we are going to create a material. And I'll just call it road. In the road material, we can just go to albedo and we can select a color. So roads are generally pretty gray. So I'll make it kind of a darkish gray here. And to apply it to our road, let's select the road from the hierarchy and drag the road into the inspector. Now we have a gray colored road, which is a good start. We also need some sort of object to represent our player/cards. So let's create another 3D object. Let's right-click the hierarchy, go to 3D objects, and let's make a sphere. It doesn't have to be a sphere, it could be a cube, but I think spheres are pretty cool. I'm going to rename the sphere to player, just for simplicity's sake. And I'm also going to want to have a camera on my player. So if I select my camera from the hierarchy and using my move tool, I can move it right behind the player. And once I think it's about behind the player, I can use my rotate tool. Or I can just type in rotation about -90 degrees. And thankfully, there's a little main camera pop in here where we can kind of see what our player will be seeing. So I'm going to have it behind and slightly above the player. And then I'm going to use my rotate tool and just kind of look down a little bit. Not really required. It can be really in any orientation you'd like, but I find this to be the best layout for my use. The issue is if we move the player, the camera does not move with it. To attach the camera to the player, it's really as simple as dragging the camera into the player. Now it moves as one object. Now for moving the player, we're going to go back and look at our assets folder here in our project manager. We're going to right-click the assets folder, and we're going to create another folder. We're going to call it player. Or sorry, we're actually going to call it scripts. And you guessed it, this is where we'll be storing all of our scripts. Inside the scripts folder, we're going to right-click again and create another folder, and we're going to call it the folder player. This will be containing all the player scripts. And if we create one more thing, we will be making a C# script. And I will call this player movements. You might notice your computer ramping up a little, and it's just generating files for that. If you double-click player movement, it will launch Visual Studio or your preferred IDE. I will be posting the code into the chat, so don't worry too much about copying as I do, but maybe focus a little bit more about how we will be running this. So first off, we actually don't need this bit of code here, but essentially there's a built-in function called start that will be called when the first frame is rendered within the game. What we will be creating, however, is something called a serialized field. And what a serialized field does is it takes any variable to the right of it and renders it into the Unity view or into the inspector. So I will be creating a float called move speed, and we can see it in the editor in a second. I'm just going to be dragging the script onto the player. So with the player selected, I can drag the script into the inspector. Now we can see here our serialized field called move speed. So the reason we serialize fields is essentially when we're creating reusable components, it's a lot easier to just edit its value inside the inspector than it is to open up Visual Studio and change some code. Although it is completely possible to change it inside the code. So if I was to make it 25, move speed would be 25. However, since we serialized it, there is going to be a bit of a problem there. So there is something called like an order of operations, probably a more proper term for it, but essentially the variable move speed will contain 25 if it was not serialized, or if we kept a void start, it would actually take priority of whatever we set move speed to within here. So move speed would actually equal to 5 because once the game starts, it will run this piece of code here and equal to 5. But finally, it will always prioritize whatever we set it to in the inspector above all else. So it's best to just change variables and set variables within the inspector. Now to getting our player moving. We're going to want to write some code. So I'm going to start by making a function called movements. And essentially, when we're moving a player, we're checking for keys to be pressed down, such as W for forward, A for left, D for right, S for reverse. So if we say if input get key using key code W is pressed, what do we want to do? We want to take the transform of the sphere for the player and translate it forward. To get forward, we simply refer to vector3 dot forward, and we want it to move at the movement speed based on the time it takes to draw the last frame. And this is essentially what we're doing for moving forward, but also moving left. And if you can kind of guess how we'll be moving left, instead of moving forward, we will say moving left. Actually, no, this is a mistake. This would be translating left. A better way to do this is to rotate, because a vehicle doesn't really translate to the left or just kind of teleport to its left. It has to rotate its wheels to turn. So instead, what we'll be using is transform.rotate, and we'll be making a new vector3 data type and setting it to the left. It's more for reversing if we want to change translate. So step forward, we would say back. And to turn right, we will be rotating once again, but to the right. Now, this is just a function. In order to use this function, we have to put it inside the update code block here. And the update code block is called every single frame. Oh, I see a question. For the serialized field, what could I do to ensure that I can only input positive numbers, for example? What you could do there is, oh, that's a great question. The way I could probably implement that is by making an if statement that's always checking the serialized field and say if it's less than 0 or equal to 0, you can set it to another number. You can do console.log, or that's a different language, my mistake. We could do print and say, you entered an invalid number. Or you can simply set something else, like a default. That is one way to do it, but generally, what you can also do is kind of set a comment and say, please input a number above 0. And that should come into the inspector, unless I put it in the wrong place. Or generally they would open the actual code and see it here. But that's one way you could do it. There's many different ways, but the final and last check for that is if you were to hit play and check and you input a negative number, you'll be seeing a bug where you're essentially moving backwards. So now that we have our code here, let's go ahead and test it. Oh, I'm actually moving in the wrong direction. And I believe that is because I put the camera to the right of the player, not behind the player. So an easy way to fix that is to remove the player, or remove the camera from being attached to the player, and just moving it where it should be. Something like this. Rotation's a little bit messed up. Something like this would work. Now I can attach it again, and then move the player, the entire player object to -90, and back to its start position. Oh, you're right. I did do that. I will actually post the correct code for you real quick in the chats. And then once you paste that code underneath update, you're going to want to call movement inside the update function. No worries at all. I'm having a bit of error here. Let's see why. I might have inputted something wrong here, but I'm just going to use the same code that I gave everybody else. And did I call movement in here? Yes, I did. And I have player movement attached to the player. Perfect. And the main camera is attached. Okay, perfect. Now we're moving around the map. The camera's a little bit too close, so I'm just going to move it back a bit here. A lot of game development, you're kind of just moving and changing things in iterations. So now we have movements. So how did I know about the existence of all these different functions and methods? Well, I actually referred to the Unity documentation. This is basically going to be your new best friend, as sad as the reality is as a game developer. Documentation. Inside this wonderful documentation, I can see all the properties, the methods, how the inheritance members are handled, etc. And that's not just for transform, but practically every single component that comes with Unity is included in here. So refer to often, it's basically your Bible. I would also recommend, if you like to challenge yourself, try implementing velocity and acceleration formulas for a sense of realism. This will apply your sense of math. So just some in-depth explanation. Imagine Unity as just one large Cartesian grid. So we can kind of see a bit of the grid here in the open space. But since this is a 3D game, it will also have a z-axis. Objects within this grid have coordinates, x, y, z. In math terms, x would be your scalar, x, y, z would be your vector, or a 1x3 matrix. I recommend reading about vector, math, and matrix operations to get a more thorough understanding of how movements and transforms are handled within game engines. This will help you create player controllers, but also in the future, if you'd like, make your own game engine. Before we get any further, we are going to look at how we are going to keep our work area organized. So it's pretty simple right now. So while it's simple, we're just going to get ahead of ourselves and right-click our hierarchy and create an empty object. And I'm going to call this empty object something like a bunch of equal signs and player. Since it's actually an empty object, it doesn't really matter what you name it, because it has no components besides transform. So this everything underneath player will be related to our player. And if I copy this and just rename it, and everything underneath environments are objects within our environments. So why am I doing this, even though there's only a few things within the engine itself? Well, games get pretty large, and general housekeeping is expected in nearly every job. So even if you're working at a fast food restaurant, it's also expected of you that you will also sweep and mop and clean the dishes. Although you have a nice cozy sit-down job as a game developer, this is your version of housekeeping. It's thoughtful and kind to both your future self when you come back to your older projects and you try to figure out what the heck you were doing, but it's also kind to team members and future team members. Imagine being recruited by a large game company like CD Projekt Red, and you open up one of their game engines or their scene files, and it's just a huge spaghetti monster. That's not going to help your imposter syndrome, and it's going to be very intimidating. So to help the future juniors that will be learning underneath you, let's just keep it clean. It takes a couple of extra seconds, but the improvement it does is incredibly valuable. So we can also look at adding a checkpoint. Actually, let's go straight to power up, because I know we're running out of time here. So creating a power up. Power-ups keep the game interesting. Power-ups introduce something called comeback mechanics. So say you're playing Mario Kart and there's 12 people in the game, but you're in 12th place and you're so far behind the first player. Well, you can get the infamous blue shell and kind of shell whoever's in first place and slow everyone down. Comeback mechanics keep the game interesting because even though you're last, there's always a last-minute possibility that you can come in first. So let's work on creating that. So what Mario Kart has is a mystery box. So we're going to actually make another divider here, and we're going to call it objects. And we're going to our project manager here. And we're going to create, within the scripts folder, we are going to create another folder called mystery box. And inside our materials, we are going to make a new material for our mystery box. And I'll just call it mystery box once again. And I think the color purple is pretty mysterious. In game development college, we learned something called color theory and how certain colors like red is seen as aggressive and blue is seen as cold. It's good to learn up on that, as a lot of psychology and your subconsciousness is usually applied to game mechanics to keep you addicted and to create a sense of wonder. So now that we have our mystery box material, let's create a cube. So right-click your hierarchy, hover over 3D objects, and go to cube. And we're going to name it mystery box. I'm just going to place it in front of the player here. And I'm going to drag the mystery box material into the inspector, and now it's purple. If we go into the mystery box scripts, we can create another C# script and just call it mystery box once again. Now this is going to be a little tricky because usually a mystery box will give you a wide range of abilities, and it randomly selects those abilities and gives it to the player. But for time's sake, we're just going to focus on the main ability seen in Mario Kart, such as the shell, or essentially like a shooting mechanic. But before we get into the mystery box, let's go back to the player movement script. Inside the player movement scripts, we're gonna want to create a couple more serialized fields. Now, I'm serializing these fields not so that I can set them inside the inspector, but I'm creating them just so I can see the values while I'm testing the game. It's a lot easier than making a print statement every single time you want to see the value of something, and then remembering to comment it out or delete it entirely before your game hits production. So we're going to want a Boolean called can shoot. So if can shoot equals true, you're able to shoot. If can't shoot equals false, you're not able to shoot. The reason I am not initiating it here is because everything that is inside a serialized field is always set to false or 0, unless otherwise set in the inspector. But although you'll be able to shoot, we want to know what will we be shooting. So let's create another serialized field, and just make sure it's public. It's usually public by default, I believe. No, it's private by default. So I'm going to set this to public, and we want to shoot another game object, and that other game object is going to be a projectile. And I'll just copy and paste that into the chat for everybody. I'm actually going to set this to private just for the sake of consistency between these two lines. I'm not going to worry too much about this line because we know it works. So now we know that there is a Boolean whether or not we can shoot, and if we are able to shoot, we will shoot a projectile. So that means we're going to need another function called shoot. Now, how do we shoot an object? Well, once again, we'll be detecting the keyboard. So if we say if input.getKeyDown keycode space. The reason I use getKeyDown instead of getKey is because getKeyDown would always return true while you're holding down space, whereas getKey detects it and then returns true once. Or no, sorry, it's actually the opposite. This returns true while the key is pressed. This returns once it's pushed once. So to shoot an object or to spawn an object is essentially what we're doing. We want to instantiate. Instantiate is basically taking an object that we have defined in the inspector and placing it where we would like. So this is the object we would like to take, and we're going to want to place it right where the player is. I will also be pasting this code for you all. So if spacebar is pressed, please spawn a projectile with the same position and the same rotation where I am. But we can notice that we also actually need to call shoot inside update. Oh, I actually missed something here. What I want to know as well is if I'm actually able to shoot. No worries about the code I pasted to you guys. Your code should already have that. This piece of code here, but basically saying if can shoot is true, we're able to shoot, so this logic will be used. If can shoot is false, we're going to skip over this block of code and nothing will happen. So now we have the ability to shoot for our player, but we're missing a few things. The first thing we're missing is our projectile. The second thing we're missing is the logic. When the mystery box is touched, we want the player to have can shoot equals true. So to do the first projectile, we're going to create something called a prefab. So essentially we're going to create, let's make it a cylinder. No, let's make it a capsule just to differentiate between the sphere and the cube here. So right click the hierarchy, create a 3D object, and we're going to create a capsule. I'm going to rename the capsule to projectile, just to make it nice and simple. And then I'm going back into my project manager. I'm going to create another folder. You guessed it, it's going to be called Projectile. Inside Projectile, I'm going to create another C# script called Projectile. Oh, gotta double click that. Now it's open. So for projectile, we're going to need another serialized field. And it's going to be a float. And we're going to make it called projectile speed. So how fast will this turtle shell or bullet or whatever you may like it to be, how fast will it be? That will be defined within the inspector, but projectile speed means nothing if it's not moving forward. If we refer to our movement code, we know how to move the object forward. So essentially we're saying transform, translate it vector.3.forward at the speed of projectile for delta time. I'll post this code for you into the chat. So this is your serialized field. And then this is your logic for moving the projectile forward. I'm going to save it. I'm going to open Unity back up. Give it a second to reload. I'm going to select projectile. And I'm going to put the code for projectile into the inspector. And it is not moving forward. Let's find out why. Oh, I set the projectile speed to 0. If this were to be a multiplayer game, I know that player's move speed is 25. So we're going to want it to be faster than player. So let's make it double. Let's make it 50. Oh wow, that's pretty fast. I might slow that down a bit. I'm gonna make that 30. I'm gonna try hitting play. Yeah, that seems way more dodgeable and a bit more game balanced. So now we have a projectile that moves forward faster than the player. But it's just in the game space. How do we spawn it? Well, two things. The first thing we want to do is remember to avoid the spaghetti monster, and in our project manager, we'll be creating another folder and we'll be naming it Prefabs. Inside Prefabs, we'll just put Projectile inside here. And now that we have a defined prefab, think of a prefab as like a blueprint that you've created and can be reused infinitely. So what we have inside the world space is essentially just a clone of the prefab. And we can see here, it has a script and it has the speed that we set it. Everything is saved. So now that we have the prefab, we're going to actually drag the projectile into here. So now our script knows that the prefab we will be spawning is this projectile here. And now we're only missing one thing, which is the mystery box's logic. So what we want the mystery box to do is once the player has collided with it, set can shoot to true. Actually, we should test projectile first. So I'm going to manually set can shoot to true and try shooting. Cool. There really needs to be a limit on this. So let's go inside scripts. Inside scripts, we'll open up the mystery box folder and double click on mystery box. So this code is going to be relatively simple. We actually don't need start here as well. We actually also don't need update. So let's just clean it up just to make it easier. I'm going to say private void on trigger enter. It actually auto-completes when you press tab, which is amazing. Well, most IDEs do that, but just in case you didn't know. So what we have here is when something is colliding within a defined area, it looks for what object collided with it. And if we say, let's actually make a function before we put anything in there. Let's make a function and let's call it shell. So pretending that the projectile is a turtle shell. And you can make more functions. So you can make a mushroom if you'd like to make a speed boost later on. But for now, we'll just call this shell. And we're basically going to say game object other to take in the other that returns from on trigger. And we're going to say, we're going to look for the component of the script that we created. So the script we created is called player movements. So we're going to look for player movements. And we're going to look for can shoot inside of player movement. And we're going to make it true. I'm having a problem here because C can shoot is lowercase. Due to its protection level, I made this private. Let's make this public. There you go. My mistake. Yeah, we want that to be public, not private. So essentially, if we call shell whenever it is triggered, and we feed in the argument other, we're basically saying, take the other thing that collided with me, find its game object, and if that game object has the player movement component that we created from the C# script, look for can shoot Boolean and make it true. But another thing we want to do is destroy. I'll be pasting this code, no worries. So what destroy does is it removes it from the world space. So we're basically saying destroy my transform component, or destroy my transforms game object, and that would be the mystery box itself. And I'll post the code quickly for you guys. And if you can kind of get in the flow of things, you kind of see I'm kind of repeating the same actions, but doing different things. And this is about the third time we're doing this. I'm selecting mystery box from the hierarchy. I'm taking the mystery box C# script that we wrote and dragging it into the inspector. I might be missing a step here. I'm just going to double check my trusty little document here. Oops. Nope, that should be everything. So let's test it out. Or actually, I already have to set the true. So let's try again. No, that will not work because we're missing something. So mystery box collider doesn't know the player is colliding with it because we're missing another component. The component we are missing is called a rigid body. So you just type rigid into the search bar here and select rigid body. Using gravity might cause some problems because the movement code we have in here is very simple, but let's just give it a try and see what happens. Oh, it's fine. Cool, cool. Yep, no, it does cause problems because rigid body adds in 3D physics. So let's go ahead and make this kinematic instead. I wonder what the problem is. Oh, I'm forgetting to inside mystery box inspector, you have to enable is trigger. Because we're using on trigger enter, this is a method of the trigger component, and the trigger component will not be enabled unless we say, yes, you're a trigger. So once you have is trigger enabled on mystery box, let's try testing that again. Okay, it disappeared like we wanted to, so other players can't steal the mystery box we just grabbed, and now we're able to shoot. Cool. So now we have, I would say, the most fun thing about a card game you can have, which is like a mystery box and power-ups. Shooting your friends basically and sitting them behind, you're basically going to destroy your friendships if this were to be a multiplayer game. And we have about 4 minutes left until 7:30, or sorry, 8:30. But if you have any questions about Unity game development, feel free to add it into the chat now. I'll finish up quickly in the PowerPoints, and for those who want to learn more about the extra stuff that goes into your card game, I'll probably do one more. So creating a finish line. and then I'll call it there. But I did, in fact, include the PowerPoints in the workshop channel on Kier's Discord channel or Discord server. And I have a bunch of challenges here for you guys to use from what we learned from the workshop, just to try to culture your self-learning abilities and use the knowledge you gained right away. I also have another challenge pertaining to the mystery box, but to make this a real shell, I would say try adding some code that when the projectile touches another object, make that object have its movement disabled for 5 seconds. So I would think about what we just learned, how we have a trigger and the code we have within the mystery box itself, such as on trigger enter, taking that collider and calling another function. How would you disable someone's control for about 5 seconds? I'm going to include the entire list of challenges as well. But one thing I'd like to mention is, oh, no worries at all, Maria. One thing I would like to mention is those who take what they learn in the classroom and apply it to their own free time often learn and excel more at the subject. So this also includes going to or viewing workshops for those who's viewing this as a video. So already well done. Quick question, how to move around in the scene view. So if you right click in the scene view, you can pan around the camera, and using WASD, you can move forward, backwards, left and right. But if you're unable to do this, you might have the game view selected. So I'm actually unable to move here or pan around the camera. So just make sure the scene view is selected, and you should be able to move freely. So to take this game further, I recommend creating a main menu, creating a pause menu, and a retry menu. Also, maybe design a better map than just a straight road. But if you're feeling creative, maybe create multiple maps if you're feeling like you like being a game designer or an environment artist. And if you create multiple maps, make a map selection. Give it a wacky theme. So maybe make it related to animals. We all know about the turtle and the rabbit. Maybe the turtle can shoot shells and the rabbit can use carrot sticks to increase the speed. A lot of games are all sharing the same mechanics, but what makes them different is their design, the themes that they have. Some people play Apex Legends, but some people play Fortnite. Fortnite has building, Apex Legends has sliding. That wacky theme really makes your game unique and different from others. Or you don't have to build off the cart game at all. Try creating a new game with your newfound knowledge. And like I said at the beginning of the workshop, add it to your portfolio, no matter how it looks. It really shows off how far you've gone. I have projects I created years ago, and when I go look back at it, I'm pretty impressed by how much I learned over all the years. So that's the workshop. 1 hour has passed. For those who would like to stay, I will be implementing a finish line. But you've learned about pretty much everything there is to do with the basics of this workshop, such as trigger, how to organize your workshop, what the layout of Unity does, and you can almost basically certify yourself as a Unity beginner. So let's get on to creating a finish line. So a finish line is basically a checkpoint, but it triggers the end of the race. Some challenges you can do for that is displaying a timestamp or displaying a leaderboard. So we're going to make another divider, and we're just going to call it events. And I'm going to place that above objects because that just feels more right to me. And I'm going to be creating another empty object. And I'll be placing it underneath events. Make sure you're placing it like underneath, but not like inside the object. There's no problem with placing inside the object, but that might mess up your scripts depending how you're accessing elements. So with this game object, I can either select it and press F2, or right click and click rename and just call it finish line. Do we need to know how to code if we want to be a game designer? So it really depends where you're working. If you're working for a very large studio, let's say Microsoft, you don't really need to code too much, but some basic understandings of scripting is very important and will set you apart from other candidates. The reason that is because it allows you to understand A, how the game will be created, B, what is possible, what is impossible, and C, how large each game design you're making or each game mechanic you're designing takes. So for a small card game like this, you could probably do this over 2 days for a game jam. Or if you want to go more in depth, you could probably spend 3 months on it and release it on a platform like Steam. Because card games, not much coding goes into it, but it's more about the theme and about the design. So knowing that these differences help giving your designs to a programmer, because if you have some questions about how things are done, you're able to explain to them. And it also allows you to know what is possible and what is impossible. But if you're working for a smaller studio, let's say an indie studio, and there's about 10, 20 people part of that studio, you're going to be wearing a lot of hats. As a game designer, instead of maybe just writing on a Word document about the game design, you might also be placing assets in the environment. You might also be writing the story behind the game if it's a story-based game. So it's good to specialize into one single thing, such as game designing, but it's also good to have a little understanding of everything else. Just know A, that you like what you specialize in the most, but B, you're able to work closely and easily with other teams. And game development is one of those things where you're going to be working very close with other departments in comparison to something like software development, which is what I'm doing. Because as a game designer, you might say there needs to be this many exhausts so that the artist can implement some special effects like fire or smoke coming out of the exhaust. And then the game programmer will actually have to code for that exhaust to have fire or smoke coming out of it. And when you specify specific numbers, it really helps the game. I hope that answers your question. So with this finish line, we're going to be adding a box collider. And this isn't really the size we want it to be. We're probably going to want it to be a bit more wider. So using my R key on my keyboard, I can switch directly to scale. Another way of doing this is you can also change the size in the box collider. There's really many ways to do one thing. Some people may have strong opinions on which way you should do it. But as long as it works in the end, that's kind of the important part. So once I have my finish line, I'm going to want to place it what appears to be the end of my map. Oh, also you can use Q and E to look up and down, or move up and down inside the viewport. So this is about the end. And let's make it a little bit larger, just in case the player somehow has the ability to jump over it. As a game tester, you'll find that a lot of things you'll be doing is like jumping the same corner multiple times, trying to get out the map. As repetitive as it is, it's super important. One of the games I made and released to my QA testers, there's probably over like 50 places you could jump out the map. And I'm really glad we found that before we released it to the public. So we have our finish line here. And if you can guess from what we've been doing from our earlier steps, we're going to be going to scripts again. We're going to be creating another folder, and we're going to be calling it finish line. Within finish line, we're going to be making another C# script, and we're going to be calling it finish line. And we already know we're going to be dragging it into the inspector later, so let's just drag it now. Oops, I did something wrong. I'm just going to delete this and try again. Script class cannot be found. Huh. All right, I'll just call it something else. I'll call it finish. Oh, I know why. It's because I have a space bar. So we actually want to do finish line with no spaces. Camel case and other naming conventions is really important when it comes to programming in general. But when you're using external tools, it's extremely sensitive because you're kind of at the mercy of whoever programmed the tool. In this case, we're at Unity's mercy. So now we have the finish line. We're also going to want to add a rigid body. We are not going to want this to have gravity because it's just a floating box in space, but we do want to be kinematic. And the reason that is for one of the methods we'll be using, which is the trigger. So inside finish line, let's open that up here. We are basically going to say, actually, we don't have anything in our player yet. So let's go to our player movement and let's make another serialized field. How do I want to do this? I'm just going to make a Boolean for now, and I will give you guys a challenge of attaching it to a HUD. So we'll make a Boolean and we'll call it is finish. And it's essentially the same code. On trigger enter, other .game object, get components. Actually, no, this is way too simple. Let's not use a Boolean. Let's actually make the HUD together. That will be a little bit different. So to make a HUD, we're going to want to find our player inside the hierarchy, but thankfully, since we made some dividers, this is very easy to find. And we're going to right-click our player, and we're going to make a UI, and we're just going to put some text. And that text will be finish text. And finish text, it's going to say finished, or game over, or race over, whatever you'd like. I'm just going to go into the game view to see what it looks like. I want it a little bit larger. I want it to be a little bit more bold. And a cool thing here is I can just, can I move from there? I'll leave it where it is. Oh, there you go. Now it's centered. Finished. So just to repeat myself, right-click player, go to UI, put in a text. I named mine finished text. I put in the text box here, finished, and everything else is just making it look a little bit more pretty. For the person asking about game design, you may also want to think about the theme of the game. So if this is related to the turtle and rabbit example I used earlier, you can actually also put in a image instead, and your artist would go into Photoshop and maybe write finished, but with a customized font that has to do a little bit more with rabbits and turtles. Maybe it'll be made out of plants or carrots or whatever turtles eat. A little bit of research kind of goes inside designing, as you can see. I don't have too much understanding about turtles. But once we have that in, let's go back inside our finish line code. And we will still be getting components, but instead of just get component, we will say get components in children. What this does is it looks for children of player. So player touches the finish line. And what are we looking for, or what child are we looking for that player has? It would be canvas. So inside the code here, we're looking for canvas, and we're going to make it enabled. But for that to make sense, canvas has to be disabled in the first place. So click on canvas inside your hierarchy, and just click this button here to make it disabled. Don't worry too much with the code. I am going to paste that right now. If I can paste it. There you go. So let's test it out. I'm not sure if I got everything in there, but this is why game testing is a thing. So our mystery box works. We're going. Finish does not appear, and I am not sure why. Where's the finish line? Yeah, so where I am, it should definitely have already triggered. So let's do some debugging. Finish line has the script and has the rigid body. It is kinematic. Maybe it has to do with the player. Oh, I know what I did. I wonder if you guys can guess. We made the same mistake earlier. I forgot to say it's a trigger. I guess a big part of game development is also learning from your mistakes, which you can see that I'm taking a little bit longer to do. So make sure you have the box collider is trigger enabled on your finish line. And there you go, finished. So another thing you can add on here, if you right click finish line, go under UI, is a button, and that button can trigger code. So if you wanted to go back to the main menu, you can make that happen. If you wanted to award the player trophy points or however you design your game, that is possible too. But now we know how to make UI inside Unity itself. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed the workshop, and if so, I also would like to challenge you to create a main menu with the HUD that we just learned how to do, pause menu and retry menu. And feel free to refer to this video when curious, post it to their YouTube channel as much as you like. For the pause menu, you might want to think, how do I detect keys? I recommend checking the documents, but also earlier, if you check your other code, you can see how we get keys. You might want to use get key down instead of get key, but whatever works after you test it. And once get key is pressed, we want to say, hey, let's make this UI enabled. How do we make it enabled? Well, you might want to check your documents or your code as well. Is it possible to design the UI in a design tool like Figma or Adobe XD, then export it to Unity later on? That's a really great question. I've actually never tried that. I haven't really used Figma too much. So I'm curious, does Figma export as PNGs? Because Unity supports PNGs. Oh, cool. You can export to PNGs. As you can see, well, really any field online, you will be doing a lot of Googling, but you will really be utilizing your reading skills. So yeah, if you can, as long as you can export it to a PNG and then drag it into Unity, you might want to make another folder called images and maybe I don't know, main menu. You want to drag your images for the main menu in here. Rather than using a text, you can use an image. So yeah, I don't see too many problems with that. Actually, I need to correct myself. Don't use an image. Use an image button. Or image button might be an unreally thing. Use an image, but then add a button behind it. You may want to play around with the concepts, but it will really really tickle your problem-solving skills. You learned from game activity the day before that you can export your Blender project and design into Unity Direct too. Yeah, I haven't done that exactly, but Blender has great integration with Unity, like almost native. So if you're referring to like 3D assets, yeah, you can literally just drag the export right in, and it's just like all there, and it works perfect. Blender's a little tricky because sometimes the size and the scale might be wrong, so you might have to play around with that. But yeah, no, Blender works great. Blender is a great competitor in the game development and movie industry because it's completely free and has all the abilities of a more premium tool such as 3ds Max or Maya, 3D Maya. The UI is a bit different. So if you know Blender and you're going to those other tools, it has the same tools and same definitions. You just kind of have to figure out where the button is. But once you learn all the shortcuts, you will become very good at it. And same thing with Unity. You're just using like F2 or WER to learn shortcuts. Another question. What is the difference between Text and Text Mesh Pro? In my Unity version 2021, if I choose Text, the Unity also gives me Text Mesh Pro version. I believe Text Mesh Pro is, I believe it's like a mesh system where it supports more fonts. I do not know exactly, so I'm going to refer to the Unity documents here. Or an easier way is Unity Text Mesh Pro. Oh, apparently I have searched up in the past. I just forgot. It's powerful and easy to use. It uses advanced text rendering techniques along with a set of custom shaders. It provides improved control over text formatting. So it looks like it's everything text is, but better. I believe the reason they gave it a different name is for migrating, so that you actually have to migrate your text over. Another skill, if you guys are looking to become Unity experts, is learning how to migrate from your older projects to newer versions of your engine. It's a tool that it's a skill that you'll definitely use in your career as a game developer or even as a software engineer slash developer, because technology is always improving and it's always being updated. And if you're able to patiently read what is different and migrate it, it's a powerful tool. Something I did recently is I used something called Cypress.io at my job. And we were like using a very, very old version of Cypress. And when I updated it, everything was broken and I didn't know why. And I was scared that the software developer lead software developer was going to yell at me because I broke all of our testing. But thankfully I was able to find the changelog. I was able to see what was different and how to implement the migration. I think it was somewhere around version 7. Oh, there's a migration guide, even better. So look for migration guides and how to migrate your stuff. Don't be afraid to watch YouTube videos. Because the best part is if you're employed as a software developer, game developer, or even as a game designer, you're salaried, and as long as you use your time effectively and good for the project, you can just sit and watch YouTube videos, and as long as it's related to your project and you're learning, it's honestly a great gig. I really love what I do, both as a software developer and as a game developer. It's definitely a great industry to be in, especially as it's more on the creative side, and it's just generally fun. If you're passionate about what you make and what you do, I do believe that improves your life overall. So yeah, that's the entire workshop. Is there any more questions? Yeah, it's extremely fun. Every job has its downsides, but of course, as long as you're able to be excited to go into work, or at least not hate going to work, you're honestly winning at life. You're winning compared to most other fields. And that's what I like about game development and software development is I genuinely enjoy the products that we make because I use it in my own life. And if whoever was the game designer questionnaire earlier, I recommend you looking into this. If you're located in really anywhere in the world, Ubisoft is a very large company. But in particularly, if you're in Ontario, there's something called Ubisoft Next. Oh no, that sucks. He took it down. But what Ubisoft Next is, oh cool, now it works. I'm not sure why, even though I'm a software developer. If you're looking for an internship and you're looking for seasoned veteran game developers to mentor you, a great way to do that is to participate in Ubisoft Next in whatever you would like to specialize in, whether that's programming, animation, design, arts, what have you. Every 2 times a year, I believe May and September, they put out these briefs that you can read, and it gives you a challenge. It's like a game jam. You get 48 hours, and the top 3 people get an internship over the summer with Ubisoft, and it's pretty sick. Have I interned at Ubisoft? Unfortunately, I have not. I would definitely like the opportunity to. I have went to class with people who are now at Ubisoft, and I have spoken to several Ubisoft recruiters, but I never had the fortune of working at Ubisoft myself. Around finishing my game development diploma, I decided to go into software development instead. Maybe sometime in the future, I will pivot back to game development. But the reason I did that is because I actually originally, before going to game development, studied computer science. And before I studied computer science, I studied computer engineering. So I'm working with a company that does both computer engineering, so IT, and I'm working as a software developer, so I'm doing the computer science aspect of it, and I'm just really enjoying what I do now. But if somewhere down my path, I would like to go back to game development, I would definitely go to Ubisoft. I recommend, if you have a social media addiction, LinkedIn would probably be the best social media addiction you can have, because you can network with people, and if you join certain groups like indie games developer, you can meet people like in the industry that you like to be in. So this might not just be game developing. If you want to go into AI or machine learning, you can join those kind of groups as well. So feel free to network with me on LinkedIn, and I give you full flexibility to search my my connections, and you'll actually see a bunch of recruiters from several different game companies. I recommend talking to them, tell them who you are, get yourself known, get yourself out there. I think maybe 2 years back, I don't remember her name. I had the lovely opportunity to speak to this recruiter, and I told her, hey, I'm still in school, but maybe in the future, I would like to work at EA. And you can do that to all kinds of recruiters. And over time, when you build up your LinkedIn profile, you actually have people contacting you to recruit you instead. You know, people might say, wow, you're so good at game designing, game programming, game art, or whatever you want to specialize in. And they would like you to work there. Looks like there's Microsoft, the Coalition, there's all these jobs just sound way too difficult and kind of out of my range right now, but it's good to have. So I recommend networking a lot. So you learn about Ubisoft Next, but you can also learn about Graduate Game Jam, was one I went to. Oh, there's also Global Game Jam. This is probably the biggest game jam in the world. Because I'm located in Ottawa, I got Carleton first. But there's a lot of game jams you can participate in, and I really recommend networking, talking to people. You might already go there with some friends as a team, or you might go there with nobody at all. But this is a place where you can meet your own people, and I heavily recommend it in an industry such as game development, because since it is a creative industry fueled by passion, you don't really get a chance to talk to a lot of people who are into the same stuff you are into, and this is where you can just be yourself. Awesome. So that looks like it's the bulk of the questions. Thank you for coming to my workshop, and if you stayed this long, thank you. It looks like you have a great culture of learning. I recommend to keep on learning, but you're all going to do great things one day, and I'm glad to be a part of your journey. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn, feel free to add me on Discord, and if you ever have any more game development questions, feel free to message me, and I'll do my best to help you out.